Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. So today I wanted to talk about the 2012 movie On the Road, which is based off of Jack Kerouac's 1957 novel On the Road. After all the videos I've done on this channel talking about the novel On the Road, I figured it was due time for me to talk about the adaptation of the novel into film. And the first time I saw this movie was back in 2012 when it first came out. And when I first saw the movie back then, I honestly enjoyed it. But this time around when I watched it yesterday, I didn't enjoy it this time. It didn't do it for me like it did for me before. And I think the reason for that was because when I saw it back then, I'd read the novel several times before seeing the movie. And I think I was just so excited that the novel was finally turned into a movie that I just had my blinders on. I was just so excited that I wasn't thinking very critically about it. I was just so excited to finally see, visually on screen, this novel. And this movie took decades and decades and decades to make. Throughout the years, they had multiple attempts to make a script, to find people to play Sal and Dean. So it took a lot of work to make this movie. I think that the reason for that is because it's just a very difficult novel to turn into a movie. Because a lot of Jack Kerouac's writing, it's written in the way that jazz and bop music is played. It's very spontaneous, it's very free-flowing. It's just kind of written in the way that a saxophone solo is played. So it's very hard to turn that style of writing into film. And I understand that it's an adaptation. When you turn a novel into a film, it's an adaptation. It's not the same thing. It's meant to be a little different. You're meant to be able to give your own interpretation of the original work. But I don't think that this movie did a very good job at doing that. I don't think it ultimately succeeded in turning On the Road into a very successful movie. It just didn't work. So I wanted to talk in this video by going over the major differences I noticed as I watched the movie. I kind of jotted down things here as I was watching. But the major difference about this movie that I noticed right away, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, the movie combined elements of the 1951 draft and the 1957 draft. Because the 1957 draft that was published, everyone knows, it uses, all of the names of the characters are changed to fictional names. But the 1951 version, it uses the real names of the characters. So the movie used the fictional names. It took the names from the 1957 version, Dean, Sal, Mary Lou, but it took a lot of elements of the writing from the 1951 version and used that in the movie. Because one of the opening lines in the book, 1957 version, is I first met Dean not long after my wife and I split up. But in the 1951 version, the opening line is I first met Neil not long after my father died. So it's taking elements of the original draft and using a lot of the characters and names from the 1957 version in the film. I mean, that makes sense. You want to use the character names that are in the novel that was published that everyone knows. So that makes sense. But I think it's very cool that they took both versions and kind of spliced them together to make this film. It's not a bad thing. It's something I actually enjoyed about the movie. Then another thing that I noticed, there's a scene in the movie where Sal goes out to Denver to visit Dean. And in the novel, he spends days and days and days trying to find Dean. He's hanging out with all people Dean knows, but it's like, where is Dean? Dean's missing. But in the movie, he finds Dean right away. He immediately goes to Denver and Dean's right there. I'm going to get into why I think they did that. I think that there was a reason for that, obviously. After this scene in Denver, when he's visiting Dean, there's this whole section in the novel where he's in California visiting a friend in the San Francisco area, and he kind of travels around California a bit. That section is missing, and it goes right to the scene where he's with this Mexican woman, Terry. And the scene in the movie where he's with this woman, Terry, it seems very out of place because, the movie takes away all these little tiny scenes that are in the book. It just takes them away, and this is the one scene that they use, the scene with Terry. I think they did a fairly decent job depicting that part with Terry, but it just felt out of place. It just was very random in there. And another thing that I noticed, there's this section towards the end of the movie where they go to Mexico. And in the movie, they leave right from New York City. But in the novel, Sal's in Denver. At the time he goes the trip to Denver and he's visiting Dean there. Then they go to Mexico from there. So it took out that scene as well. Not necessarily a good or bad thing, but just something I noticed. But one thing I noticed is at the very end of the movie, there's a scene where Sal abandons Dean in New York City. Dean wants a ride, and Sal says, I'm going to a concert with my friends. I can't take you. In the movie, it's so much more harsh because Neil comes from. He says that he just hitchhiked across the country to go visit Sal. But in the novel, Dean was in New York City for several months before that scene happened, where Sal abandoned him in New York City. I don't think that's necessarily bad. I think that, when you're making a movie, you have to give it a little more punch in the end to give the ending a little more solid of an ending. I think that allows for that. It gives the ending's a lot more emotional. I think that's a very good thing. It's a good thing that they adapted in that regard. But what I do notice is that the movie is very, very focused on Sal and Dean's friendship, to the point that it's almost, I think, it ruins the film. I mean, obviously the main focus of the book is Sal and Dean's friendship, but there's so many more little things that happen, little stories here and there, that the movie leaves out. And I think that that's what makes the novel good. What makes the novel so good is that it just feels very real. There's so many just little teeny tiny events that happen here and there. It's just traveling around America. And it makes his journeys feel a little more whole, a little more wholesome. And by leaving those out, it just kind of makes the movie feel very, very hollow. Like it's just focusing on the friendship. And there's so much more to their friendship that's based off of things that happen in between all of their meetings that it's missing from the novel. And the movie also leaves out all of these descriptions of America. Throughout the novel, Sal is always analyzing America through the lens of his own life. He's talking about different phases of his life by describing where he is in America. And those descriptions of the country are just not in the movie, which, I mean, I don't expect them to be, but it's just something that's missing. That adds a lot of character to the novel that's missing from the movie. I mean, the movie has a lot of visually good images of America, things that represent America, just open roads, but you're missing hearing Sal say those things and read those things. It's just not something I think they should have left out. They should have found some way to incorporate that into the movie, because the novel has this feeling of freedom and wandering. Wandering in almost in a religious sense, like they're looking for something, they're searching for truth and they're wandering. But in the movie, it's just kind of repetitive and just aimless. Like there's no substance to their wandering. They're just kind of going back and forth, visiting each other without really going into, philosophically what they were searching for on the road. And it just kind of goes back and forth between, Sal going to visit Dean, Dean going to visit Sal, just boom, 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 like back and forth across the country real quick. That there's not a sense of wandering. It's just aimlessness in the film, if that makes sense. And the film is also very contemplative. You see Sal writing his story while he's traveling, always writing in a notebook. There seems of him typing throughout the movie. And I think, obviously they want to show that the story is something that Sal ultimately wrote about. But I think it really just slows down the story, because in the novel, they don't talk about him writing the novel as you're reading it. Like it doesn't work that way. But by stopping to show him writing the story, it just slows things down, because the novel is very just stream of consciousness, spontaneous, just go, 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 go. And by stopping to write about it, it just really drags down the story. I don't think that really adds a lot, the way that they did that in the movie. Because the book is it's just very wild and free, and the movie is just very slow and just emotionally distant. They don't really go into any detail, like I said before, about what they were searching for in their travels. I think also that just counterculture, something that's not relevant to younger audiences today. They don't really understand what counterculture is, in the sense that people who probably live in the 50s and 60s understand it. But I think they did try to make it relatable to a younger audience. They tried to put elements of counterculture in the movie to make it relevant. But I think they focused too heavy on the politics of counterculture in the movie, because the novel is not political at all. But in the movie, they really add this political element to it. They have many times throughout the movie, Sal and Dean, they reference Harry S. Truman saying that we must cut down on the cost of living as an excuse to steal. I mean, that's in the novel, but it just it's a little more prevalent in the movie. And there's a scene where Sal is walking past a billboard for like Levittown houses, and he's just this wanderer, drifting around, just walking past this billboard, showing something that really represents 1950s America. In the movie, there's also a scene where he talks about how Douglas MacArthur banned kissing on the streets of Tokyo. So it really just adds this element of politics to it. And whenever he walks past a TV or radio, there's always some program on about law or anti-communism, or just talking about government. And I think they're just trying to add this political counterculture element to the film, and that's just not in the book the way that it is in the movie. Another major thing that I think they're trying to relate to younger audiences is just there's way too many sex scenes in this movie. It's just way too many. It's too much that it distracts from the movie itself, from the story itself. And I know that sex sells, like that's going to help sell the movie, but I just found it very distracting. It just didn't really add anything to the movie. I mean, like those scenes are in the book, like it's there, but it's just not as prevalent. I feel like the movie is like 25% sex scenes, and that's just not what the novel is. So I think that really takes away from the movie itself. And going off of that, I feel like the movie just gives a very negative depiction of women. And I read an interview of people who worked on the film, and they talked about how Kristen Stewart's character, she plays Mary Lou. Kristen Stewart tried to portray Mary Lou as someone who isn't just used by other men in the story, like has her own personality, has she's someone who helps move the story along. Because in the novel, I feel like she's just kind of used by the men. But I feel like in the movie, it does that even more. She feels even more used by the men because they have so many sex scenes. She's depicted as being this object in the film, and it just doesn't do a very good job depicting women. And in a way that the movie, I don't think was very relatable to younger generations, because younger generations don't understand counterculture in a way that older generations do. The novel is still it's not relatable to older generations either, because it really doesn't capture the spirit of the novel everyone knows. And I think that they really tried to do that. They tried to keep the spirit of the original dialogue. Like a lot of the things that they say in the movie are right out of the book. They really tried to capture that, but it just feels very forced. You can tell that they're forcing this style and the way people talk, that it just comes off as very awkward. And I think another reason it didn't work very well for older audiences is that it just tries to be too relevant. And it tried to be so relatable to younger audiences that it just lost the feeling of the original novel. And as much as there were things that I did not like about the movie, there were things that I did like. There were some individual scenes that worked very well. There were some scenes where Sal and Dean are talking that feel very real and very emotional. But when looking at the whole movie, I don't think those scenes really flow well very together, but individual scenes do work very well. My favorite scene in the movie is at the very end of the novel where Jack Kerouac, or Sal Paradise, is writing the novel on the road, where he's just going away at the keyboard. That captures him writing the novel very, very well. I love that part. It definitely did a good job doing that. And it has this scene where you see him staring at a blank typewriter with a blank piece of paper, and it cuts to a scene on the open road. He's thinking back to his travels. So that juxtaposition of the open road and his blank typewriter does a really good job just showing what the writing of the novel represented. He wrote it on this long, continuous scroll when he wrote the first draft, and it kind of that unrolling scroll is very similar to Unwinding a Road, and it did a really good job showing how those two things relate. And the music in the movie is very, very good. There's so many scenes in the movie where they're in jazz clubs listening to jazz music, and it really does a good job showing how much music influenced Jack Kerouac, influenced that novel. It just shows the characters going from being in a club listening to jazz music, listening to pop music, and going on the road somewhere else. It kind of puts those two things together very well. And along with that, the movie did a very, very good job casting the characters. Good casting doesn't really make up for bad writing, but the casting was excellent. Sam Riley, who plays Sal Paradise, really captures, I think, the innocence that Jack Kerouac had when he was traveling during those years. And Garrett Hedlund does a really good job capturing Dean Moriarty. I mean, I feel like he's a little slower in the movie than he is in the novel. In the novel, he seems a little more fast and a little hyper. But besides that, I think that Garrett Hedlund does a really good job capturing that outlaw, cowboy, western kind of cool style. He's a really good job doing that. And Kristen Stewart did a really good job too, but I think Kristen Stewart focused on capturing Luann, the character, or the person who Mary Lou is based off of. So she definitely captures Luann a little better than she does Mary Lou from the novel, which is definitely intentional. But I think a lot of criticism you see of Kristen Stewart's character is that she didn't really capture Mary Lou very well. But I think that she was trying to go for Luann. She did a really good job doing that. And like I said before, one negative thing about her character is that she feels a little more used by men in the film than she does in the novel, which I don't feel like that was the intention of the novel or the intention of the movie, but that's how it came off. I think that's one negative aspect of her character. And Kirsten Dunst does a really good job capturing Camille, who's based off of the real life Cameron Cassidy. I think that she portrays the character perfectly. That's exactly what I think of when I think of Carolyn Cassidy. She definitely did an excellent job. Because Carolyn Cassidy was still alive when they filmed this movie, so they definitely, I think, got to talk to her and get her input on things, which definitely benefited Kirsten Dunst's character. And Viggo Mortensen does a really good job capturing Old Bull Lee. I feel like in the novel, Old Bull Lee does a really bad job capturing William Burroughs. So in the film, I feel like Viggo really focused on capturing William S. Burroughs. He does such an excellent job capturing the way he talks, the way that he moves, the way that he acts. It was just spot on. And his wife, Jane, who's played by Amy Adams, also does a really good job. I feel like Amy Adams really captures this kind of the quirkiness that you think of the character Jane. But I think the best character in this movie is Karl Marx, who's based off of Allen Ginsberg. And in the movie, he's played by Tom Sturridge, who does a really good job capturing Allen Ginsberg's personality and the way that he talks. And he talks in a very poetic way throughout the movie. And it just spot on. Like, he captured Allen Ginsberg perfectly. I think that he by far had the best acting in this whole movie. But like I said before, even though the casting was so good, even though the acting was so good, it didn't really save the movie in the end. Good acting doesn't make up for bad writing. Because there's another Jack Kerouac novel they turned into a movie, Big Sur. Big Sur has really bad acting. They did a terrible job casting Big Sur, but it's written very, very well. They captured the novel so well. I think the reason for that is because Big Sur is a very compact story. It takes place during a 3-month time period, so it works very well for turning into a movie. So that just goes to show that casting is not everything when it comes to a movie. Because Big Sur is such a more powerful movie than On the Road. I plan on doing a video talking about the movie Big Sur, but On the Road just didn't hold up in an adaptation the way that Big Sur did. And I'll talk about that in another video, but yeah, I just want to point out that there was another movie based off Jack Kerouac novel that they did a very good job adapting. But after watching this movie a second time, I really think that On the Road is just not a novel that can be turned into film. It's just very difficult. It's just the writing style is just something that doesn't really hold up when it comes to film, because the writing style is what makes On the Road great. And you can't really depict that writing style in film. But I think what would be good is if they made a movie about Jack Kerouac writing On the Road, if they made a movie about the whole process and trying to get it published, that would be a really good movie. Because with On the Road, they tried to include him writing the novel in the movie, and this didn't work very well because, if there was a story of him writing the novel, that would have a very clear central plot that they can follow that story. But in the movie On the Road, it's kind of all over the place. There's no central plot to it. I feel like in a movie, you need a central plot more than you do in the novel. Because a novel, you can kind of be spontaneous and all over the place, but in the movie, it has to be to a point. You have to have a point of direction that the movie's going. And the movie just doesn't have that. Because if they made a movie about him writing On the Road, it could be set in the novels, The Dharma Bums and Desolation Angels. So you could have this central theme of him writing this novel set within all of this travel he's doing during the events of Dharma Bums and Desolation Angels. So if they ever do another Jack Kerouac movie, that's what they should focus on. Focus on those two novels, but instead of depicting just those novels exactly as they are, add this story of him writing On the Road while the events of Dharma Bums and Desolation Angels play out. But anyway, these are some random thoughts I had after watching On the Road yesterday. And like I said before, I don't think it really holds up the way that I remember holding up the last time I saw it. And I think that it really, for lack of any other way to say it, just failed cinematically. On the Road, the movie from 2012, is a cinematic failure.